Okay, so I got my vise all ready to install. I cleaned it all up, got all the rust off of it, put the jaws on it. Now I just need to put a space for the back of this to fit through. I want the top of the vise, actually the top of the jaws, to be level with the bench. The opening for this back part to start at 3¼ inches. So it's going to be 3¼ inches down. And then that opening, it needs to fit this part. So it's going to have to be, we'll say about 2 inches. We'll make it a little bit bigger than it has to be. 1¾ really. So 3¼ down, 1¾ for the size of the opening, and it's got to be 6 inches wide. So I was trying to figure out exactly where I wanted my vise to go. I do want it to be more towards this end rather than being in the middle. And the reason for that is normally I'm right-handed, so if I'm planing something and say it's something really long, I want to be able to clamp it at this end and be able to plane along with my right side, because I'm right-handed, against the bench. You want to plane towards where you have it clamped. So if I had it at the other end, I would have to plane left-handed. That would be kind of awkward for me. Not a big deal. So, but generally you want to have it towards one end or the other of your bench. And I don't have too much underneath here to worry about getting in the way. So I think I'll make it, let's see, we'll have it start 6 inches. That's a nice even number. 6 inches away from the end. This hole doesn't have to be real precise, so I'm just going to use a 1/2-inch drill bit and make a series of overlapping holes all the way around, and then I can use a chisel to kind of square it up a little bit, but like I said, it doesn't have to be very precise. I'm actually going to drill right on the line. The line was the exact size that we needed to be, so if I drill right on the line, it's going to be a little bit bigger, which is going to give us some wiggle room and make it easier to install. There we go, that looks pretty good. Let's give her a trial fit here. Alright, good. Got some room to be able to adjust the height a little bit. So that'll be good. Now, I think with a lot of vices, this back plate here is where you would bolt it in to your bench, but in this one it's got this plate here and you have to bolt it up into the top. So right now there's a gap that I'm going to have to fill. So I'm going to put my ruler down here and 2 inches, about 1 7/8 is where the top of this. So between this top and the opening, the top of the opening is 1 7/8. So I'm just going to say 2 inches. So I need to have 2 inches of a block of some sort underneath here to fill up that space so I can mount the so I can bolt the vise to it. So I realized after I cut this piece that I made a mistake. If you imagine I'm sticking this into the side of the bench, imagine that this piece is the side of the bench, and you look at the holes, you can just barely see the holes that I'm going to be mounting this with. They're mostly going to be going into the side of the bench. So if I put the bolts in here, most of it's going to go in the side of the bench. A little bit it's going to go to that extra block I made, which is not ideal. So I think instead what I'm going to do is make a spacer to put between the bench and the vise. And so that's going to move it out a little bit, so that way these holes are lined up right with the side of the vise. So I'm just with the side of the bench. So I'm bolting it right into the bench versus into the blocks I was making. So it's one of those things where you can't think about everything until you actually start doing it, or at least I just don't. I don't think about everything. I'm not perfect, you know. So since the surface that I'm mounting the vise to is actually going to be this part right here of the bench, I need to spend a little bit more time evening it out. So I have a more flat, it doesn't have to be perfect, but more flat surface to mount the vise against. Kind of a pain to do it in this way. A better way probably would have been to use a router and then route out. You can make a little template or just a guide and route out the recess here. Just trying to avoid more work, like taking apart the bench and setting it on its side, but you know, the hard way leads to the easy way. Is it something like that? I was trying to take the easy way and it's leading to the hard way. So here's what I was thinking. I would put a spacer in between here, so then the bolts would go right up into the side of the bench. But the problem with that is I'm moving the vise further away from the bench, and it's really going to make it less stable, I think. And I don't really need this much space between the vise and the bench. So I'm going to change my idea. Instead, I'm going to make a recess for this part of the vise to fit in. So then this side of the jaws will just fit flush against the bench. Yeah, so I'm just going to chisel out, like making a housing dado. Shouldn't be too bad, and it doesn't have to be super precise. All I have to do is make it deep enough for this to fit in, and then the vise is going to register off the sides of the jaws. So I can make it too deep. It's not a big deal. I just need to make it deep enough so then the jaws are flush against the side of the bench. Well, after about half an hour of chiseling, I did finally manage to get the vise to fit. There we go. So now I just need to put in the lag screws that are going to go into the top, and then I'm actually going to screw this side of the vise flush against the side as well. As long as it's up against that side, I might as well screw it in there because it's going to help reinforce it. I took off the front jaw of the vise to make it easier to clamp the vise against the bench, and also so I can screw this side. Now I just need to get it into position, which is a little bit tricky. And clamp it. So I tried to use a regular twist bit to drill underneath here, but the problem is I can't really get very far with the drill. It's not long enough. So I'm going to try using one of these bits that you use with a brace and bit. It's not really designed for this, but it is really nice and long, and I think I can get it chucked up in the drill, so we'll give it a shot. So it turns out that using this sawdust in the eyes. It turns out that using this bit does actually work. It doesn't work great, but what I had heard was that if you did this, it would just try to screw in, because it has a much coarser like screw to it, and it would just kind of drill right up, or like screw like you were driving a screw into a piece of wood. But that wasn't really a problem. So if you're in a pinch, it does work. Turns out that this vise is not actually designed to be bolted in from the bottom. It's supposed to be bolted in from the top, and I know that because you can't actually get a socket up far enough in there. It's too tight to get a socket actually in there to bolt it in. So lesson learned. What I'm actually going to do is just screw in this jaw. The vise is attached to the jaw on the other side, and that should be good enough. If it's not, I will learn and work around the problem. Well, I got the vise installed and ready to use, and like a lot of things, it turned out to be more work than I thought it was going to be. From cleaning it to making the jaws and installing it, which was definitely the trickiest part and the part that I didn't anticipate being a lot of work. It did end up being a good amount of work, and it would have been a lot easier if I had just bought a vise off of Amazon or something. But it was important to me to reuse this vise that had been my grandpa's and that my dad had made for him, because I like to reuse tools, and I especially like to reuse tools that have some sort of family connection. So I know I'm going to use this for a long time, and it's nice to look at something and think like my dad made this and my grandpa used it. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time. Take care.